Hi guys, in this video, we're going to be going step by step as to how you can start your own podcast. I'll take you all throughout the way and we can even do it together. So first thing is first, I have a workbook here in which you can start off by answering these questions to start creating your podcast. So the first thing you need to do is figure out what are you hoping to achieve from your podcast. For me here, the podcast I'm creating is to inspire young entrepreneurs by sharing success stories. So the next thing you do is identify your target audience. And for me, I'm aiming way between 25 to 35. So then you also need to clarify your content. Like, what would your podcast be about? So for me, the podcast I'll be creating is going to be focused on entrepreneurship and self-growth. Next, you need to come up with a structure for the podcast. So for me, I want to create weekly interviews, right? And each episode is about 45 minutes long. Then you want to evaluate the production options. So you want to see, do you have a production studio? Would you be doing it at home? What options do you have? So let's assume for the sake of, for the video, let's say we do have a good microphone and we do have good lights and we'll be doing it in-house. And I'll show you the steps very shortly as to how to create a video indoors. The next thing you want to figure out is a distribution platform. You want to know where you're going to be distributing your podcast to. For example, you need a hosting platform. Now, what is a hosting platform? A hosting platform, think of it like a hub. So it's a big basket where you upload all your content. For example, you do an episode, you upload it to this big basket here. And what this big basket does is it distributes it to other smaller baskets. So take, for example, the smaller basket in this scenario is going to be iTunes, Spotify, Google Play. So what you do is you upload your episode into the big basket, and then the big basket distributes it to iTunes and Spotify. Now, what is this big basket? So what are a few options? SoundCloud used to be a great one, but today we have Buzzsprout, which is what I use. So I hope that's clear to you. Next is also you need to figure out how are you going to be monetizing in the future. You don't have to have that figured out now, but just come up with a strategy. For me, in my case, I want to consider affiliate marketing and like sponsored episode. The next thing you want to do is understand what you stand to gain from launching or starting your own podcast. There could be a lot of reasons. Some people want to be perceived as experts, so you can easily become the key person of influence in your industry. If you are a videographer and you create a videography podcast, you easily become the key person of influence, and that comes with a lot of perks and benefits. Also you get to network with other people. So people tend to, when you reach out to guests to come on your podcast, people typically always say yes because people like to share their story. So you're building a lot of network one-on-one meetings with people who maybe with other podcasts would have never really want to sit down with you, but because you have a podcast, they might want to sit down with you, and you have their attention for an hour, and you can convert this to whatever you want to convert them to do, to sales or business partnership. There's a lot of opportunities there if you decide to go that route. There's benefits to being launching or starting your own podcast or being a podcaster. The next thing you want to figure out is your title and branding. So you want to create a compelling title so that when people see it, they kind of have an idea as to what the podcast is about. So take, for example, if I was to name this, I could say the name of my podcast is Money Moves, Your Guide to Financial Freedom. Like, I can use that as the name of my podcast title. So the next thing you want to create is also a logo and a cover art. You want to pick something that matches your theme, stands out. You create a cover art, and basically the cover art is basically what people will see when they search your name on iTunes, for example. When they search Money Moves, you want something to show up that makes sense or that looks great. So typically people can easily put your face. I recommend maybe starting off, use your face at the very beginning. It's great because people can easily, I know this person, and then they can want to listen to you. People connect more to that than necessarily graphics, but it's completely up to you. You decide. So that's what the cover art is, and you can use Canva to design most of these things. So when you go to Canva, just simply search podcast cover art. There's a bunch of examples, and you can just simply edit any one of those templates. Step number 3 is figuring out your equipment. If you are going to be doing this by yourself, or you're going to be going to a studio, you need to figure that out. But in this video, I'm going to provide you some options as to consider. So if let's go with the assumption that you're going to do this by yourself, either in your office or at home. I have some items here that are beneficial for you. So here's a list of items that you can pick from. If you're doing a budget-friendly option, that's on the lower end. Here's it, and here's the prices. Honestly, you can start with $400. You can honestly create a mini podcast studio at home. So this here has all the items you will need. You will need your microphone, and this, given the fact that you might have to use your iPhone to record the video podcast, your hosting platforms, how much that will cost, your lighting and your editing software, all of that, you're looking about close to roughly, you can spend max 400, 500 to get this off the ground, right? That's a very beginner friendly option. And then there's different options here. If you look over here too as well, I also have a professional podcast setup, everything you need from the mic, cloud lifters, recorders, mixers, cameras, lens, editing software, all that breakdown, and the link too as well as to where you can get them. Your other option too as well is if you're going for a professional podcast setup. So these are if it makes sense for you to go all out in it and create a system or setup that's just, hey, I just want to come in, sit down, press record, and have phenomenal videos and phenomenal audios, you can definitely use this option too as well. So here's all the link and here's all the items you will need. Now, I can share with you what my setup looks like so you can have an idea as to how it is, because this is all you need for a podcasting anyways. So what I have here is, if you look directly in front of me, what I have here is I have my camera just directly pointed at me. I have my mic right on top. That's this right here is my microphone, and it connects directly to one that's right on my chest. And it's just on a tripod. It's just directly in front of me. And to my left hand side, what I have is my light source. So if this is a light box, it's right over here. It's on the left hand side. You always want to have it this way. If you have your camera in front of you, you want to put your light on the left or on the right, but typically here, because you want to create a nice shadow on your face. So this is the typical setup. So you can purchase one of these microphones over here. Typically, this is all you need to start your own podcast and do a video podcast. So you might ask yourself, like, why would you want to do a video podcast? In today's day and age, you probably want to do video podcasting because it's absolutely essential. You don't have to, but it's actually beneficial if you do, because you can chop up those clips and put them on social media, put them on Instagram, Facebook, or wherever to garner a lot of attention. So typically that's what people do. When they start your podcast, they create video content because short video content is easy to digest. Podcast is a long form, so it's harder to get people to commit to you. But if you make short form videos, it's absolutely beneficial and people would consume those quickly. And then hopefully if you build enough cachet with them, then they want to go in and listen to your long form podcast. So this has everything, all the information you need. The next thing you want to figure out is episode planning. So it's planning for each episode. So take for example here, you want to say, all right, if you are going to be interviewing somebody, who would you interview? You want to prepare that in advance. Next thing you want to look at is define the main topic or the theme of this particular episode you're going to be creating. Next is you want to research the topics, like put in notes here of things you've read, things you want to highlight while the episode is going on. You want to structure the episode, have a proper intro, your main points that you want to pass across, and the outro. You don't necessarily have to have a script, but if you want a script, that's perfectly nice. Sometimes for podcasting, having bullet points just so you don't miss anything, or the moment you lose out of content, you can always refer back to your bullet points and then continue with that. You want to make sure that if you are going to be producing yourself, you figure that out, or if you are going to be going to a podcast studio, you need to figure that out too as well. And you always want to make sure you've confirmed guests. Sometimes the problem with podcasting with other people is that you need to work with their schedule, so it's not definitely the easiest of things to figure out, especially when people have different schedules. So you want to make sure that you are prepared in advance for anything. The next thing is editing and publishing your video content. So, a typical setup for a podcast is having an intro at the beginning, an outro at the end, and then a music overlay. That's the basic way to edit a podcast. So I'm going to show you a quick, very easy way to start editing your podcast for those of you who are kind of lost. So, here's CapCut. You open CapCut, it's free. Once you open it, this is what you get. So, you just go ahead and create a project. And then what you want to do is you want to click on import, and then you can import the particular your podcast videos and your intro and outro. So what you do is you simply drag and drop. You drag and drop it into the timeline. And if you have an intro, you can put the intro here, assuming this is, and then put your outro. This is the outro. Put that in here. Now you can do that. Now, if you want to scrub across, this is how you scrub across it, by clicking on this cursor and going along. And if, for example, you have errors or mistake, you do the letter B, you press letter B, you break it, that's a blade, you cut it here, and then use A to select, and you can select that portion that you've just cut off, and you can just simply delete it, and it automatically fills it out, right? Once you're done, you want to go in here where it says export. This is where how you want to export your video once you are done editing it. If you want to edit it just audio only, you can click on this and you can put the format in which you want to export it as, and you can export this. Click on export. You definitely click on where you want to save it, save the file. Once you click on that, you hit export and you're done, and that exports just the audio. And then if you want to do it with the video, you don't need to check that box, and you can just export it. Now this is the quickest way, simplest way to start editing. If you guys want more detail, I'm happy to share, but just want to cover out the basics. So this is the people in their area. So that's the quickest way in which you can start editing your podcast right now. Once you've done editing it and you have your actual video, what you want to do is you want to host that, just like I described. The hosting platform is just a big basket that holds, you upload all your content into, and it distributes it to iTunes, Spotify, and everywhere else you want to distribute it to. So once you do it, you just want to go to browserpod.com is what I would recommend, but there's a lot of different options now. But they do have free options, but it's limited, so you might just have to pay for it. Totally up to you. So basically, when you're here, you can just simply create your podcast. This is general information. You provide them with your podcast title, podcast description. You want to upload your podcast cover art. You want to upload the sector or whatever it is, and then the artist's name. Once you have that, you want to attach your RSS feed. It gives you an option where you can copy RSS feed and you can paste that in here once you have that, or it generates one for you, right? Then what you do is you start uploading episodes. So you just go to episodes, you upload a new episode. Honestly, this is very simple. You just have to go in, create an account, just like creating a Facebook account. It's kind of that easy. So once you have that, you click on upload, you upload the file that you want to include. You input your episode title, your episode description on here, and then your episode artwork, your season, episode number. It's honestly one of the easiest things. And once you save episode details, honestly, once that is done, provides you with an RSS feed. And once you are done with that, once you have your RSS feed, this is what you then copy and put into iTunes, Spotify. You just have to set up an account with iTunes and Spotify, and then copy your RSS feed and simply paste it on there. And that's all you need to do to be able to launch and create your own podcast. I hope this was actually valuable to you guys, because I was trying to create just an overview. I hope you don't feel overwhelmed. If there's any aspect of this that you want me to break down in more detail, please reach out and let me know. I'm happy to do that. This second part, we're going to be looking at some frequently asked questions when it comes to podcasting and ways in which you can level up your game. So we're going to be looking at 10 questions here, and I'll be providing answers. We're going to be covering everything from advanced audio editing techniques, how to do remote interviews, some tips for remote interviews, and also how to plan an engaging episode. So let's get into it. So the first question here is, my audio sounds okay, but I want it to be great. What advanced editing technique should I learn? So you've got your recording down, you figured that out. So now you want to make sure that it sounds really crisp. The first thing you want to learn is noise reduction. So even in a quiet room, there might be a bit of background hiss, hums, things like that at the back. So using noise reduction tool can really help you clean out all the imperfections, all the errors, and make it sound more richer and add more warmth to your audio. And you can smoothen it out with those software. So the software I use is DaVinci, but there are a lot of AI tools out there now, and even Adobe has a platform where you can upload your audio to it, and it smoothens and automatically edits it out for you. But you can definitely use your own editing software like Adobe and Final Cut or DaVinci, which has buttons to help you clean out the noise reduction. The next word you want to learn is compression. So you've probably heard this, you've probably encountered this or heard about this. But what compression is basically it's the key for balancing your audio levels. So compression just helps you even out those peaks and valleys. So you want to make sure that every part of your episode is consistent. So you don't want your audience where they have to reduce the volume when it's too loud and increase the volume when it's too low, when it's all in the same track. You know what I mean? So that's what compression is and something you have to learn. Next is equalization. So EQ allows you to shape the sound of your voice. So you tweak it like you're tweaking the bass, the mids, the treble, like to change the voice to add more clarity and warmth to your audio. So that's what you experiment with till you find exactly what is great and what is a good sound for your podcast. Now, what is mastering? So mastering is just basically a combination of all of this process together. So when you hear someone say mix and master, this is what they're talking about, is the editing of all of this. When you put that all together, that's what you get, your final polish. It is what ensures that your sound, your episode sounds consistent and doesn't sound different when people are listening to it on different devices. So that's what you call mixing and mastering. Yeah, so I hope that answers that question. The second question here is, I'm doing remote interviews. How can I ensure everyone sounds good, even if they are using different equipment? So that's a great question. So in this space, remote interviews are like a huge part of podcasting now, in today's world. From small podcasts to the big podcasts, they all utilize remote podcasting. Which is great because you can definitely have more higher names or more credible people on your podcast to interview. But there's some few things that you have to keep in mind. Like you have to use the right platform. So one of the best ones that I've used is Riverside FM, or you can use Zoom or Squadcast. But Riverside FM is what I use. And the reason why it's great is because they allow you to record separate audio tracks for each participant. So this way you can fine tune each individual voice during the whole editing process. And this is absolutely very helpful. The next thing you want to do is also just prep your guest before you begin. Like, you want to suggest that your guests are using headphones, using a decent microphone, even just a little bit of an upgrade, like using Apple headphones, things like that, beforehand. Next is always have backup. So usually you want to ask your guests to use their phone on while you guys are interviewing to record the audio, just in case something happens. Because trust me, there's nothing worse than doing an interview with someone and the person had an error on their side, or you end up having an error, you didn't press record, something like that. Things like that typically happen. So what you want to do is make sure you always have a backup. Next is optimizing the settings. Like, if you're planning to show you if you're trying to set the audio up, just make sure that you are fine-tuning all the settings. Make sure that you are going through the levels, make sure that you can hear the person clearly first, do some testing, and then make sure everything sounds crisp before you begin shooting. The next question is, show notes and transcripts seem like a lot of work. Are they really important? Honestly, I get it. Sometimes the extra work on show notes and transcript feels a lot and it's overwhelming. But trust me, it's honestly very valuable. So it's valuable for your listeners. So, your show notes provides a clear summary of the episode, complete with links, resources, and timestamps. Like, they make it easier for your audience to follow along, to revisit the key points that you're looking for. Or amazing when you have YouTube videos where you have timestamps. It's great. Timestamps are awesome. Like when somebody can click on and see what it is. For show notes on podcasting, it also helps with your SEO, so transcripts. So
your transcripts can help you when you're for help when people are searching you online. So, when search engines can read your transcript, it boosts your visibility and brings you, in terms of ranking. And when they're searching for you, you show up higher on the ranking. And also accessibility. Not everybody listens the same way. Transcript make your content accessible to hearing impaired listeners and those who prefer reading. Now, there's a lot of people who prefer reading sometimes, so you want to provide that and not alienate them. Okay, so the next question is, I'm getting busier. Can I record multiple episodes at once? And how do I manage that? See, I've been here. I've had to juggle my work while producing my own podcast. Now, if your schedule started to feel really like you're juggling, like you want to start maybe batch recording a lot of episodes. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you plan ahead. Start by aligning several episodes in advance. When you have a clear roadmap, recording multiple episodes in one go can really become much easier. You want to schedule like back to backs, because we've had episodes where we shoot 3, 4 episodes on a Saturday, have them go back to back to back. But all of this requires proper planning ahead of time. Now, if your podcast features interviews, try booking maybe like guests, all in that Saturday or Sunday, whatever day you to choose. This just saves you time. And once you get it going, your creative juices just starts flowing. You get the momentum going. And then sometimes it might not be, it's exhausting, but it might actually be very comfortable for you if you do want to try that. So next thing, you want to stay very organized. If you do decide to go down this route, you want to make sure that you keep your files neatly organized. Whether it's on your computer, your cloud storage, your hard drive, a good organized system can really be a huge time saver when you're editing later. Because you don't want a situation where you're like, what audio does this belong to? Like you don't know which episode it is, who you interviewed. So you want to make sure that you really organize your files ahead of time, especially when you are trying to do batch recording. The next question here is, what does a typical podcast production workflow look like from start to finish? Now, let's break this down. Podcast production process into manageable ways. So, planning. This is where everything begins. Like you decide on the topic that you want, you decide on the guest you want to have on it, and you want to sketch out roughly what is going to be that on that episode, what you're going to be discussing on that episode. So if you have questions, you want to start sketching the questions out right now. If you do have a script, you want to start making the script ahead of time. Next is recording. You want to capture your audio. So if you're just strictly doing just audio, you just want to focus on that, you could do that. You want to make sure that your equipment and setup is ready and it's working perfectly fine before you begin. The next stage is now your editing. You're taking all the recordings you have, you clean that up, remove all the mistakes, enhance the sound, with some different techniques like add music, sound effects as you see fit. And then you should be good. The next is now your mixing and mastering. Remember I mentioned earlier what mixing and mastering means. This is just like I said, like you said, it's just polishing your audio tracks. That's all it is. And doing all those things I told you about earlier, just making sure it sounds good. Then after that, you want to publish. You upload your finished episode to your hosting platform, and then you complete all the essentials with your show notes and transcripts so people can have access to it. Next is promotion. Don't forget to share on social media. So come up with ways in which you can start distributing or bringing more awareness towards your podcast episode. So you want to make sure that you find ways to start collecting people's emails so you can create a newsletter, or any group you create, like an Instagram group where you can connect with your audience. You guys hang out with your audience. You can then start pushing your content to those people. Next is everyone says find. The next question is, everyone says find a niche, but how do I find a profitable niche? Now, finding niche is more than just picking a topic. It's something that everyone has had to think about, especially when you've been doing it for a consistent long time. And sometimes it's difficult, but there's some couple of ways to look at it. The first thing is just let's do some basic research first. Look at what other podcast areas are doing. Check out online communities and trends to see what topics are engaging and profitable. And there's nothing wrong just copying from creatively copying a a niche of someone who's doing a niche that you kind of like love and love to be like. Use them as your inspiration. So you can look into that. So that's one way to find a niche. Also, you can, maybe if you've been doing it for a while, you can listen to your listeners already, or you can look at who you want to be listening to your podcast. So take for example, if you are going into the fashion podcast, you kind of have an idea of the kind of people who are interested in listening about fashion. So you tailor it, and that's your niche. Things like that is what you want to be thinking about. Next is profitability. Like, a profitable niche it's not just about passion. It's about the potential to attract sponsors and sell products, to be honest. So look for a similar podcast and see how they are monetizing their content. And then whoever is probably sponsoring them could also possibly sponsor your content as well. So those are things you want to think about. So if you factor all this together, I think you'll be able to figure out what niche to focus on. The next question here is, how do I plan episodes that are engaging and keep listeners coming back for more? Now, so content pillars. First of all, let's focus on that. So start by identifying a few core themes or topics that can return to again and again. This pillar gives your podcast a sense of identity and consistency. I know when we did a podcast about a mental health series, what made it unique was we always told real personal stories at the very first segment of the podcast. And that became a recurring theme for our podcast. People would always call maybe just to hear that story we told them about that segment. And that was our first part of the segment. So you can come up with your own things. Like, some people even have situations where they have guests call in, and that could be a part that's inserted into your whole entire podcast, and it's just a segment, and people would come just to listen to those segments. I've seen podcasting where they have also done even prank phone calls, and those prank phone calls are a segment, a 2, 3, 5 segment on their show, on their podcast show, and people would come gravitate into it, which is, oh wow, I can't wait to hear what prank they're gonna do next time, or what story they're gonna tell next time. So look for your own thing. Like, you can also do Q&As. Like, you can literally ask your audience questions and take those questions and then answer them in your podcast, and that could become a segment, a something that's recurring, and it's like a pillar that gives your podcast like a sense of identity and gives it consistency. Next is episode outline. So every episode should have a clear structure, in my opinion. The standard way is to have an introduction to hook your listeners, and then a series of points to deliver. That's the middle point, and then a conclusion that wraps it all up neatly. So a beginning, middle, and an ending. I think if you follow this structure, you would definitely be on the roadmap to creating great content, in my opinion. Also, next is think about the listener's journey. You want to consider creating what you want your audience to feel. Like, what should they take away from every episode? Like, a well thought out journey that keeps them coming back. So if it's something about transformation or changing their perspective or whatever it is, think about that, and then let that be um a focus of yours when you're creating that episode. So that when people comment, okay, I'm coming here to have my opinions challenged, or I'm coming here to have my opinions reinforced, or I'm coming here to learn about something that I didn't know before. You want a transformation from the moment they came in to start listening to your podcast, and when they came out, when they stop listening to your podcast, there should be a significant difference. Something in something, either their emotions, feeling, or something. You want them to take away something. And for what I'm creating now, I want you to leave here having more knowledge on podcasting. So that's the transformation I'm hoping to convey by doing my own series. So you should as well think of things like that while creating your own podcast. The next question is, I'm okay at interview, but how do I get really good at it? Now, interviewing is a skill. Let's just say that. It can be honed, but it can be honed. And here's some tips that you can use to get better. Now, first thing you'll do is really practice active listening. Like focus on what the guest is saying. This help you, this helps you ask really thoughtful follow-up questions and dive deeper into the experience. You don't want a situation where you're just so focused on your list of questions and you're not paying attention to the answers in which you're getting, right? So you want to make sure that you're really paying attention and you should be following up on those questions. Sometimes a conversation, if you're paying attention, the interview flows, the questions come naturally to you because you are taking the role of an inquisitor. So now you're asking questions, following up on what you're receiving, and that could lead into a very deep experience, and for both you and the guest and the audience listening could really really benefit from that and be really really, and sometimes you can get really the best responses through that. Next is stay flexible, kind of similar to what we just talked about. It's good to prepare, but honestly don't be afraid to stray from the script. Honestly, I've had podcasts where I've prepared for with lots of questions. I have like 20 questions ready. And once we start a conversation, after asking the first question, the questions just automatically come up. And what I prepared was not even what we ended up discussing about. So don't be afraid to stray away from the script if an interesting point comes up. Some of those best moments in interviews really come from those unexpected tangents. So think about that. Next thing is embracing silence. Don't rush to feel every pause. Sometimes the slightest gives in your guests can give them space to think and provide more meaningful answers. So allow things to play out. Don't rush them. Next is learning by example. Like for me, I always try and watch all the great interviewers. Like, I love listening to so many, like I'll watch on YouTube. I listen to other podcasters and watch their style, the way in which they ask the question. And what I found that me personally that I enjoy is I love interviewers who ask the simplest and maybe sometimes the dumbest questions. Because sometimes some interviewers speak with such authority in their field that they forget to digest things for the layman or people who are not really, familiar with certain things. So I love an interview who humbles himself to ask sometimes, define that word you just said. What is that word? I don't know what that word means. Explain this. It's like when you're in class and you have somebody who raises his hand and asks a question to the teacher of something that you wanted to ask the teacher, but you were maybe shy or afraid to ask the teacher the question. But somebody in the class asked the question for you. I'm like, oh yeah, thank you for asking that question. And then now the teacher explains it. I'm like, oh wow, I understand now. So that's basically what the interviewer is doing for the audience. So I love interviewers who take that inquisitive approach, interested in what the speaker is saying, rather than trying to either overshadow the person they're interviewing. So that's what I like, and those are the people I study, and that's for me. But you should also look into it and see who you want to emulate and who you want to learn from. Next is, what are some monetization strategies beyond ads and sponsorship? So now let's talk about monetization. So there's several ways in which you can generate revenue. One new way is Patreon and memberships. So what you can do with Patreon is simply just consider just offering like bonus content, like either early access to episodes or behind the scenes, through membership platforms like Patreon. Patreon is one of the greatest ones that exist right now. A lot of people using that. This brings in steady income, but also deepens your connection with listeners. Because I have subscribed to a lot of Patreons too as well, and I know they have communities where you can engage with the creator, and you can also provide suggestions. You guys can have connect with like mind, things like that is great, and it's a great opportunity to bring people together. So it's a way to connect to your listeners. So that's one way in which you can also generate revenue, but also deepen the relationship with your listeners. Next is creating an online course and workshop. If your podcast is centered around like a specific skill or like a niche, you might create like an online course or live workshop. This can be a win-win. Like, you're providing extra value while also monetizing your expertise. That's something to think about. Next is like live events, hosting live shows. Live podcast shows can become a really thing. Me and my podcast partner, we have done quite a number of live podcast shows. And at first, when we first started, we thought nobody was going to listen or nobody was going to show up. But truly, we were astonished. Every single time we did a show, a lot of people showed up in our local community. So it's something that I would recommend you do and you embark on. It's you never know. You just don't know unless you take that step. Build a community first, and then find ways to engage them, and then bring them all together in one big place and start organizing shows. Next is merchandising. That's one of the typical ways where everybody does is branding measures like t-shirts, mugs, and stickers. And those are still always going to work. They are like a marketing tool as well, and they also generate revenue. So whenever your fans wear your merch, they also promote your podcast and you're also making money. So things like that. So thank you very much for listening to this episode, and I hope this was very helpful to you. Cheers.
I studied over 1,000 podcasters, and what I found that was completely shocking. Some of these smaller podcasters are actually doing things that are much better than some of these big names in the industry. In fact, some of the insight I gained really changed the trajectory of this video. So what I'm sharing this is I'm going to share 3 unexpected lessons that I learned, and hopefully you can implement this into your own podcast series, or if you're thinking about starting it, some things you think about before starting your podcast. So to help you understand why I started this journey, I began this journey a few months ago just to figure out what makes some podcasts really irresistible. I dove deep into podcasts, listened to a bunch of different podcasts to find out, look into the big names like the Joe Rogans, the Brilliant Idiots, the Flagrant Twos, listen to this podcast to find what makes them so unique. And I also listen to some smaller named podcasters too as well and find out, like, for example, LD's podcast, listen to those kind of podcasts to find out what makes them so unique. So on this journey, I was looking at to find the patterns, what was unique about certain podcasters, why was it so compelling? Would doing a one-man show be better than doing a conversational podcast, like 2 people on a podcast? I was looking at to see which of these styles were better, and I found out a few things. So lesson number 1, the power of voice. I found out that how most of these podcasts use their voice is really what captivates people. The tonality, how using pauses, being very, very authentic, genuine, speaking with so much warmth. And you, the listener, they're talking to you, not at you. They bring you in. It's like you listen to them and you're having a conversational dialogue with the podcaster, even though it's a one-man show. So take for example LD's podcast, which is one of my favorite podcasts. He's gone into the narrative aspect of podcasting. So he's telling a story. Every single episode is taking you through a journey, and it's one of those really warm and engaging podcasts that once you start, you want to get till the end. So one of the lessons I learned from this is that learn to be authentic, learn to use your natural voice, talk like you're having a conversation with somebody who's behind the camera, or behind the mic. That's the first thing I learned. Even take it from the Joe Rogan, although he's having a conversation with a guest, you can see that people gravitate to the authenticity of Joe Rogan. So that's why he's one of the biggest name in this industry. So that's the first thing. So, and also learn to smile when you're having conversations as well on the mic, because people truly can feel that on the other end. It's like you're just gossiping with your friends. That's the feeling that some of this use for their shows, and that's what makes it very, very successful. The next lesson is structuring stories like cliffhangers. So majority of this podcast is what they do is they tell stories in such a way that it's so compelling, and they leave you with cliffhangers to keep on listening to the next episode and next episode. So what I noticed is that a lot of small podcasts change up their structure. So
So the typical way of introducing a topic, and then you have the huge message at the middle, and then ending with the closing. That's the regular format. Some of these little podcast shows, what they do is they actually go in there with stories. For example, like I mentioned, LD's podcast, and he comes in with just telling you stories, leaves you cliffhangers. So if he's researching about a particular topic, tells you a story about the topic. So for example, if you're talking about a topic of immigration, for example, you share a particular story of a family you know down the road who had to immigrate to wherever country they're in, and the struggles, that challenges that they had, in a story format while still addressing the topic of immigration. So that's just what I noticed, is that a lot of small podcasts change up and are willing to experiment more with their story structure or their podcast structure. And that's something that I think we could all learn from and change, break up from the regular routine of introducing a topic, talking about the meat about it, and then ending it like a boring lecture. What some of these podcasts do is they actually embed storytelling into it. So they're telling stories about a particular topic. So, like things like that, or not even that in particular, but just change it up from the regular monotone way of doing podcasting. I've seen people who do 3-minute podcasts and they record it and they upload every single day on whatever topic they do. I've seen educational podcasting that breaks it into every single subject, into every single episode, and they break it down to 3-minute episodes, things like that, just changing up the ways of doing things. So that's another thing we could learn from the smaller name podcasters. And most of the big name podcasters are normally set into their regular structure, they're rigid, and they keep using the same formula. And that's one of the perks of being a smaller name podcast. You're free to experiment as much as you can to create more engagement for your show. The next lesson here is the magic of audience interaction. Now, a lot of the big name podcasts have millions of followers, it's harder to engage with you, the listener. But some of the smaller podcasts, they are able to build such a beautiful community within their own niche topic. For example, it could be a podcast about knitting, and you find out that because of the population of listeners are not as much, you can find out they can actually engage with every single one of their listeners. You can create community, you can create groups, WhatsApp group, Instagram groups, to just create that kind of connection where you have listeners actually recommending topics to the podcaster. Hey, I would like you to talk about this next. That just creates so much bond. And sometimes they can even ask the audience for opinions on particular subject matter, and they can go have a dialogue with their listeners and have a back and forth. And I think that's what makes some of these smaller podcasters or smaller content creators, that's what gives them the edge, because they're able to build such really strong community. And honestly, that's what helps them monetize quicker, because they have such a huge community. They can do live podcast shows, a lot of these things, and start monetizing their content much quicker than anybody else. And it's all because of that audience interaction, building that bond with their listeners. And I think that's one of the things that we can take away from some of the smaller podcasters and learn from them and implement them from day one as a podcaster or as a content creator. Okay, so out of all of this, one of the biggest things that I see that smaller podcasters do better than the big name podcasters is the flexibility to experiment and take risk. And I think that's what really sets it apart. A lot of the smaller name podcasts are willing to take so much risk and willing to experiment with certain topics. And that's, honestly, I look at it as like an advantage. That's what makes you unique. So if you are starting out podcasting or starting as a content creator and you feel, oh, I'm starting out with just a few followers, honestly, it is a privilege and it's something that you should take to your advantage. Is the ability to take risk, try something different, be unique. And who knows, you doing that one different thing is what sets you apart from the multitude of podcasts that exist at the moment. And that could be what makes you successful. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope you were able to gain some information and implement some of these few things that I've learned into your own podcast series. Thank you so much for listening. Cheers.